The howling wind of Montana's bitterest winter in decades carried Willow Hargrove's desperate sobs as she collapsed into the mounting snowdrift, her wedding dress billowing around her like a shroud. 6 months pregnant, abandoned at the altar, and now left to die in a blizzard by the very man who had promised to love her forever. This was not how her wedding day was supposed to end. It was January 1879, and as the snow pelted against her tear-streaked face, Willow felt the last of her strength ebbing away. Her hands, bare and turning blue, cradled her swollen belly protectively as she tried to shelter her unborn child from the merciless cold. The nearest town was miles away, and night was falling fast. The path ahead disappeared into white nothingness as her eyelids grew heavy. "Just a little rest," she whispered to herself, knowing full well what happened to those who slept in snowstorms. But her body was betraying her, surrendering to the numbing cold that had seeped through the delicate satin of her wedding gown. A distant sound broke through the howling wind, the rhythmic crunch of hooves compressing snow. Willow forced her eyes open, blinking away snowflakes that clung to her lashes. Through the white haze, a dark figure on horseback materialized like an apparition. "Hello," she called, her voice weak against the roaring wind. "Please help me." The rider jerked his horse to a stop, dismounting with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. As he approached, Willow could make out the broad shoulders beneath a heavy duster coat, the weathered cowboy hat pulled low against the storm, and piercing blue eyes that widened with shock when they fell upon her crumpled form. "Good Lord, miss," the stranger exclaimed, kneeling beside her. "What in tarnation are you doing out here? My fiancé," she stammered through chattering teeth. "He left me when he found out the baby wasn't his." Understanding darkened the cowboy's features. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Name's Flynn Blackwood," he said, his voice gentle yet urgent as he helped her to her feet. "And you're coming with me before you freeze to death, miss." "Willow," she managed to reply. "Willow Hargrove." Flynn's strong arms lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing. "Not for much longer, I reckon," he muttered. "For now, you're Mrs. Blackwood to anyone who asks. My coat and my name are all I have to offer you at the moment, but they might just keep you alive." Willow wanted to protest, to explain that she couldn't possibly accept such charity from a stranger. But the warmth of his coat and the solid presence of his body behind her, as he mounted the horse, silenced her objections. As they rode through the worsening storm, Flynn's arms encircled her, one hand holding the reins, the other resting protectively over her rounded belly. "My cabin's not far," he said against her ear. "Hold on, Mrs. Blackwood, just hold on." That was the moment Willow Hargrove's life changed forever, not when she'd agreed to marry the banker's son who'd abandoned her, but when a rugged cowboy she'd never met covered her with his coat, and his name in the middle of a Montana blizzard. Flynn's cabin appeared like a beacon in the whiteout conditions, a small but sturdy structure with smoke rising from the chimney. By the time they reached it, Willow was barely conscious, her lips tinged blue despite the warmth of Flynn's coat. With careful hands, he lifted her from the saddle and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The cabin was simple but clean, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. "Stay with me, Willow," Flynn urged as he laid her on his bed, quickly piling blankets atop her. "I need to tend to my horse, then I'll be right back to warm you properly." Through half-lidded eyes, Willow watched him hurry back out into the storm. True to his word, he returned minutes later, snow dusting his dark hair and shoulders. "You came back," she whispered, surprised. Flynn's expression softened as he knelt beside the bed. "Course I did. I'm not the type of man who leaves a woman in need." The unspoken comparison to her former fiancé hung in the air between them. He busied himself stoking the fire and heating water. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes, madam. I've got some things that might fit you." A flush crept up his neck. "I'll turn my back." Willow clutched the blankets tighter. "I can't, I'm too weak." Flynn swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Then I'll help you, but I'll be respectful. You have my word." With gentle efficiency, he helped her out of the sodden wedding dress, his eyes averted as much as possible while still providing assistance. He dressed her in an oversized flannel shirt and woolen trousers, rolling up the legs so they wouldn't drag. Not exactly bridal attire, he joked softly as he tucked the blankets around her again. Better than a shroud, Willow replied, her voice barely audible. Flynn's expression grew serious. You would have died out there. Maybe that would have been easier, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I have nothing now, no husband, no home, no future for my child. Flynn's calloused hand found hers atop the blanket. You have shelter for tonight. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow. He moved to a rocking chair near the fire, settling in with a rifle across his lap. What are you doing? Willow asked. Keeping watch, he replied simply. Rest now, Mrs. Blackwood. Despite everything, Willow felt her lips curve into a small smile at the borrowed name. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. As she drifted into exhausted sleep, the last thing she saw was Flynn's steady gaze on her, protective and unwavering as the storm raged outside. Morning brought clarity and pain. Willow woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window, illuminating a world transformed by snow. Her body ached from the ordeal, but she was alive. She and her unborn child had survived. Flynn was already up, frying bacon in a cast iron skillet. He turned when he heard her stir. Morning, he said, his voice gruff with sleep. How are you feeling? Willow pushed herself to a sitting position, wincing. Like I nearly froze to death yesterday. A hint of a smile touched Flynn's lips. Well, that's about right. I need to thank you properly, she began, but he waved her off. No need, couldn't leave you out there. He slid the bacon onto a plate and brought it to her. Eat, you're feeding too. As Willow ate, she studied her rescuer in the clear light of day. Flynn Blackwood was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. His blue eyes, so striking against his sun-bronzed skin, revealed both kindness and caution. Where were you headed? He asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. Before everything, Willow set down her fork. I was to be married in Silver Creek. Walter Preston was his name, son of the bank owner. She touched her swollen belly. When I told him I was with child, he was overjoyed. Said we'd move up the wedding date, but then what? Flynn prompted when she fell silent. Then his former sweetheart returned from back east, told him the baby couldn't be his because, Willow swallowed hard, because she'd seen me with another man. It wasn't true, but Walter believed her. Flynn's jaw tightened. So he left you at the altar. Worse, Willow whispered. He publicly denounced me as a woman of loose morals, claimed the child wasn't his. His father, who was going to give us a house as a wedding present, refused to even let me stay the night in town. They put me in a wagon and drove me out to the main road. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Said no decent folk would have me, and I'd better try my luck at the mining camps if I wanted to find the real father. Flynn's hands clenched into fists. What kind of men would do such a thing to a woman in your condition? The kind who care more about reputation than humanity, she replied, wiping her tears. I started walking, hoping to reach the next town, but the storm came so suddenly. And the baby's father? Flynn asked cautiously. Is he truly not in the picture? Willow met his gaze unflinchingly. The baby is Walter's, despite what he believes. There's never been anyone else. Flynn nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Well, you're welcome to stay here until you figure things out. It's not much, but it's warm and safe. I couldn't impose, Willow protested weakly, though the thought of venturing out again filled her with dread. It's no imposition, Flynn insisted. I've got plenty of supplies to last the winter and, he glanced away. Truth is, it gets mighty lonely out here. Company would be welcome. Relief flooded through Willow. Then I accept your hospitality, Mr. Blackwood, but I insist on earning my keep. Flynn, he corrected, and we'll figure that out once you've recovered. He stood, stretching his tall frame. For now, rest. I've got chores to tend to. Over the next few days, Willow regained her strength. The cabin, which had seemed small at first, revealed itself to be cleverly designed, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, the small bedroom where she slept, and a lean-to out back where Flynn had been sleeping on a bedroll despite her protests. On her fourth morning, Willow insisted on taking over the cooking. Flynn returned from chopping wood to find her at the stove, hair tied back with a strip of fabric, stirring a pot of beans and salt pork. "You should be resting," he admonished, though his eyes lit up at the sight of a proper meal. "I've rested enough," Willow replied firmly. "Besides, cooking isn't strenuous." Flynn washed up at the basin by the door, sneaking glances at her as she moved about the kitchen with growing confidence. "You're looking better," he observed. "Got some color back in your cheeks." "Thanks to you," she said, offering him a shy smile. "I've been thinking about what happens next." Flynn's expression clouded. "No rush to decide." "There is, though," Willow said, ladling the stew into bowls. "This baby will arrive in about 3 months. I need to establish myself somewhere before then." Flynn took his bowl with a nod of thanks. "What skills do you have?" "I was a schoolteacher before my engagement," she replied, "but no school will hire an unwed mother." "What about family? Anyone who might take you in?" Willow shook her head. "My parents died 2 years ago. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but—" She sighed. "She warned me against Walter, said he was too smooth talking to be trusted. I was too proud to listen, and now I'm too ashamed to ask for her help." Flynn ate thoughtfully. "You could stay here," he said finally, not meeting her eyes. "Until the baby comes, at least." Willow stared at him. "I couldn't ask that of you." "You didn't ask, I offered." Flynn set down his spoon. "Look, I know it's not proper, but neither is turning a pregnant woman out into the wilderness. We can tell folks we're married if anyone comes around, which they rarely do in winter." "And after the baby comes," Willow pressed. Flynn ran a hand through his hair. "We'll figure that out when the time comes. For now, let's just get through the winter." That night, lying in Flynn's bed while he slept in the lean-to, Willow placed her hands on her rounded belly, feeling her child move beneath her palms. "We're safe for now, little one," she whispered. "And Mr. Blackwood is a good man, better than the one who should have been your father." The baby kicked as if in agreement, and Willow smiled in the darkness. For the first time since Walter's betrayal, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. As January gave way to February, Willow and Flynn settled into a comfortable routine. She took over the domestic duties, cooking, cleaning, mending his clothes while he handled the outdoor chores and hunting. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Willow learned that Flynn had come west after the war, where he'd fought for the Union despite being from Virginia. He'd worked as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy his small homestead 3 years earlier. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked one evening as snow fell gently outside. Flynn poked at the fire. "Sometimes, but I prefer my own company to most people's." "Not a people person," she teased, his lips quirked. "I like honest folk well enough, just found they're in short supply." "Yet you took in a strange woman without question." Flynn's eyes met hers. "Nothing strange about helping someone in need, Willow." The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth through her. She shifted uncomfortably, aware of how improper their arrangement was, yet unable to imagine being anywhere else. "What about you?" Flynn asked. "How'd a schoolteacher end up engaged to a banker's son?" Willow sighed. "I thought it was love. Walter courted me for months, flowers, poetry, promises of a beautiful life together. When he proposed, I was so happy." She traced patterns on her swollen belly. "Then I discovered I was expecting. I was terrified to tell him, but he seemed thrilled, said we'd marry right away. Until his old flame showed up," Flynn added grimly. "Rebecca Thornton," Willow confirmed. "She'd gone east to finish her education. I think Walter always carried a torch for her, but her family considered him beneath her. When she returned and found him engaged to me," she shrugged. "She couldn't have him, so she made sure I wouldn't either." Flynn's expression darkened. "Some people have a powerful meanness in them." "The worst part is, Walter didn't even demand proof. He just believed her instantly, as if he'd been looking for a reason to back out." Willow blinked back tears. "How could I have been so wrong about someone?" Flynn reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers. "People show you what they want you to see, Willow. The true measure of a person is what they do when things get difficult." His touch was warm and steady, and Willow found herself turning her hand to clasp his. "Like offering your coat and name to a stranger in a snowstorm." Flynn's cheeks colored slightly. "That was nothing special." "It was to me," she whispered. "It was everything." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Flynn cleared his throat and withdrew his hand. "It's getting late," he said, rising from his chair. "We should turn in." That night, Willow dreamed of Flynn's hands and the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She woke with her heart racing and her cheeks flushed, immediately chastising herself. She was in no position to develop feelings for another man, not when she was carrying one man's child and dependent on another's charity. Yet as February progressed, Willow found herself watching Flynn when he wasn't looking the way his shoulders moved as he chopped wood, how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her navigate the icy path to the outhouse. One afternoon, a sharp pain in her abdomen sent Willow gasping to her knees as she was sweeping the cabin floor. Flynn burst through the door moments later, his arms full of firewood, and dropped everything at the sight of her. "What is it? The baby?" he asked, kneeling beside her, his face tight with concern. Willow nodded, clutching her belly. "A pain, it's passing now." Flynn helped her to the bed, his arms strong around her waist. "Should I ride for the doctor?" "No," Willow assured him, catching her breath. "It's too early for the baby. Just a false pain, I think. My mother had them before my brother was born." Flynn didn't look convinced. "You're sure?" The genuine worry in his eyes touched Willow deeply. "I'm sure, but thank you for your concern." Flynn sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know the first thing about babies or women in your condition. If something happened..." Willow found herself reaching for his hand. "Nothing will happen, but it means a lot that you care." Flynn's fingers tightened around hers. "Course I care," he said roughly. "You and the little one. You've become important to me." The admission hung in the air between them, both more and less than a declaration. Willow's heart fluttered in her chest. "You've become important to me too," she whispered. Flynn's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a breathless moment, Willow thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand once more and stood up. "Rest now," he said, his voice husky. "I'll finish the sweeping." That evening, as Flynn built up the fire for the night, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Been thinking, Willow. It's not right for you to be alone if something happens. The baby, I mean." Willow looked up from her mending. "What are you suggesting?" "Town's still snowed in, but my nearest neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, is a midwife. She's about 5 miles west. Once the pass clears, I could ride over, see if she'd be willing to come check on you." "That would be wonderful," Willow said gratefully. "But will she? I mean our situation." Flynn nodded in understanding. "Mrs. Patterson isn't one for gossip, but if it makes things easier, we could stick to the story that you're Mrs. Blackwood." The borrowed name sent a thrill through Willow that she tried to ignore. "If you think that's best." "For now," Flynn agreed. "Until we figure out what comes next." The what comes next hung between them, unspoken but increasingly pressing as February turned to March and the snow began to melt. Willow's condition advanced, her belly growing rounder, her movements more cumbersome. Flynn watched her with a mixture of concern and something deeper that made her pulse quicken whenever their eyes met. The first truly warm day in March, Flynn announced he was riding to Mrs. Patterson's farm. "The pass should be clear enough now," he explained as he saddled his horse. "I'll be back by nightfall." Willow stood in the doorway, one hand supporting her lower back. "Be careful." Flynn paused in his preparations, looking at her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Always am," he said softly. Then, in a move that surprised them both, he leaned down from the saddle and pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. "Bolt the door behind me." Willow watched him ride away, her skin tingling where his lips had touched. With a sigh, she turned back to the cabin that had become more of a home to her than anywhere she'd lived since her parents died. She spent the day preparing for Mrs. Patterson's visit, determined to make a good impression. She scrubbed the cabin floor, aired out the bedding, and baked bread in the small cast iron stove. By late afternoon, she was exhausted but satisfied with her efforts. As promised, Flynn returned just as dusk was falling, accompanied by a stout, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Blackwood," the woman greeted Willow warmly, dismounting with Flynn's help. "I'm Alina Patterson. Your husband tells me you're expecting in about 2 months' time." Willow shot Flynn a quick glance before nodding. "Yes, madam. Thank you for coming all this way." Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson said, bustling inside. It's what neighbors do. Now let me have a look at you. Flynn excused himself to tend the horses, giving the women privacy. Mrs. Patterson examined Willow thoroughly, asking questions about her health and the pregnancy. The baby seems healthy, she pronounced finally. Good strong heartbeat, and your carrying high might be a boy. She patted Willow's hand. But you're thin, dear, need to put on more weight before the birthing. I'll make sure she eats, Flynn promised from the doorway, where he'd returned with Mrs. Patterson's bags. Mrs. Patterson looked between them with shrewd eyes. How long have you two been married? Willow froze, but Flynn answered smoothly, Not long enough, madam. Every day with Willow feels like a blessing. The sincerity in his voice made Willow's heart skip a beat. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. Well, you found yourself a good man, Mrs. Blackwood. Not many would be so attentive. She turned to Flynn. I'll stay the night if that's acceptable. Want to make sure everything's as it should be. Of course, Flynn agreed. You can take the bed, Willow and I will manage. That night after Mrs. Patterson retired to the bedroom. Willow and Flynn sat before the fire, speaking in hushed voices. She believes we're married, Willow whispered. Flynn nodded. Easier that way. Less questions. You didn't have to say those things, she added, remembering his words about every day being a blessing. Flynn's eyes reflected the firelight as he looked at her. Wasn't hard to say what's true. Willow's breath caught in her throat. Flynn, you should get some rest, he interrupted gently. It's been a long day. They made pallets on opposite sides of the fire, but Willow lay awake long after Flynn's breathing had deepened into sleep, wondering at the feelings growing between them and what would happen when her baby arrived. In the morning, Mrs. Patterson prepared to leave, giving Willow instructions for the coming weeks. I'll return in a month to check on you again, she promised. Sooner if you need me, and I'll be here for the birth. Thank you, Willow said sincerely, for everything. Mrs. Patterson patted her cheek. You've made a nice home here, dear. I'm glad Flynn found himself such a good wife. After she'd gone, an awkward silence fell between Willow and Flynn. She thinks well of you, Flynn finally said. Of us, Willow corrected. She thinks we're a real married couple. Flynn busied himself with the coffee pot. Does that bother you, the deception? Willow considered the question. No, she admitted. What bothers me is that it's not real. Flynn's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with startling intensity. What are you saying, Willow? She swallowed hard, gathering her courage. I'm saying that these past 2 months with you have been more real than the year I spent with Walter. I'm saying that I've come to care for you, Flynn Blackwood, more than I thought possible. Flynn set down the coffee pot with deliberate care. You're vulnerable right now, dependent on me. It wouldn't be right to what? Willow challenged. To admit you might feel something too. Flynn crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. Of course I feel something, he said roughly. I've felt something since I found you in that snowstorm, but you're carrying another man's child, Willow. Your heart's been broken. I won't take advantage of that. Willow covered his hands with her own. You're not taking advantage. You're the most honorable man I've ever known. Flynn's thumbs brushed her cheeks. I want to do right by you, by both of you, he added, his gaze dropping to her rounded belly. Then don't push me away, Willow whispered. Don't pretend what's growing between us isn't real. Flynn's resolve visibly wavered. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when Willow's arms slid around his neck, it deepened into something hungry and revealing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. I never expected you, he murmured. Never expected any of this. Neither did I, Willow admitted, but I'm grateful for it all the same. Flynn stepped back, taking her hands in his. We should talk about what happens next, really talk about it. Willow nodded, her heart racing with hope and fear. Yes, we should. They sat at the small table, hands still linked, and began to plan a future neither had imagined possible just months before. I want to be clear, Flynn said seriously. I care for you, Willow, deeply. But I need you to be sure this is what you want, not just what you think you should want given your circumstances. Willow squeezed his hands. I know my own heart, Flynn. What I feel for you isn't born of gratitude or necessity, it's real. And the baby, Flynn asked, his voice softening, I'm not its father. You could be, Willow said quietly, in all the ways that matter. Flynn's eyes grew suspiciously bright. I'd like that very much. So what are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood? Willow asked, a smile playing at her lips despite the seriousness of the moment. Flynn chuckled. Seems like you're the one doing the proposing, Mrs. Blackwood. They both sobered at the name they'd been using as a convenient fiction. I won't pressure you, Flynn said finally. But if you wanted to make it real the name, I mean I'd be honored to call you my wife, to raise this child as my own. Tears sprang to Willow's eyes. Are you asking me to marry you, Flynn? Seems I am, he replied, a smile breaking across his face. Though I don't have a ring or fancy words. I don't need either, Willow assured him. Just you. Flynn lifted her hands to his lips. Then will you marry me, Willow Hargrove, properly in front of witnesses with a preacher and everything? Yes, Willow said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you, Flynn Blackwood. The joy that bloomed on Flynn's face was answer enough to any doubts Willow might have harbored. He stood, pulling her carefully to her feet and into his arms, mindful of her condition. When? He asked against her hair. Before the baby comes. Willow nodded. As soon as possible, I want this child born to parents who are bound to each other in every way. I'll ride into Silver Creek tomorrow, Flynn decided. Find the preacher, arrange everything. Willow stiffened in his arms. Silver Creek, but that's where Walter is. Where everyone knows me as the woman he abandoned. Flynn's jaw set determinedly. Exactly. I want those people to see that what they thought was your shame turned out to be your salvation. I want Walter Preston to know that the woman he discarded found a man who treasures her. It will cause talk, Willow warned, though her heart thrilled at his words. Let them talk, Flynn said dismissively. We know the truth of us, Willow. That's what matters. The next morning, Flynn set out for Silver Creek, promising to return with news of their wedding arrangements. Willow spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between joy at her unexpected happiness and anxiety about facing the town that had turned its back on her. By the time Flynn returned late that afternoon, she had worked herself into a state of genuine worry. His wide smile as he dismounted eased her fears. It's arranged, he announced, sweeping her into a careful embrace. Reverend Collins will marry us on Sunday. So soon, Willow gasped. That's only 3 days away, Flynn's smile faltered. Is that a problem? I thought you wanted— No, it's perfect, Willow assured him quickly. I'm just surprised he agreed so readily. Flynn's expression turned sheepish. Well, I might have implied we were already married in the eyes of God, just not legally. Said we needed to rectify that before the baby arrives. Willow felt her cheeks heat. Flynn Blackwood, what must he think of me? He thinks you're a woman who deserves happiness, Flynn replied seriously. When I told him how I found you abandoned in the snow, he was outraged on your behalf. Said Walter Preston would answer to a higher power for his cruelty. Tears welled in Willow's eyes. You told him everything. Everything that matters, Flynn confirmed. I don't want secrets between us or lies forming the foundation of our marriage. Willow rose on tiptoe to kiss him softly. Thank you for defending my honor. Always, Flynn promised against her lips. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Flynn brought out a trunk containing his mother's wedding dress, preserved all these years. It might need altering, he said uncertainly. And I understand if you'd rather not wear it, given your condition. But Willow was already running her fingers reverently over the simple ivory gown. It's beautiful, Flynn. I'd be honored to wear it. With Mrs. Patterson's help, they modified the dress to accommodate Willow's pregnant form, creating a high-waisted style that flowed gracefully over her rounded belly. The older woman also brought a wreath of dried flowers for Willow's hair and insisted on baking a small wedding cake. Every bride deserves something special, she declared. On Sunday morning, Flynn left early to arrange transportation for Willow, who could no longer comfortably ride horseback. He returned with a borrowed wagon lined with blankets and pillows. Your chariot awaits, my lady, he said with a flourish, helping her up onto the seat. The ride to Silver Creek was tense for Willow, who hadn't returned since the day of her abandonment. As they approached the small church on the edge of town, she gripped Flynn's arm tightly. What if they're cruel to us? She whispered. Flynn covered her hand with his. Then we'll know they're not worth our consideration, but I think you'll find not everyone shared the Prestons' view of things. Indeed, when they arrived at the church, Willow was surprised to find several friendly faces waiting. Mrs. Patterson was there with her husband, as well as the blacksmith and his wife, whom Willow recognized from her teaching days. Most surprising was the presence of 3 of her former pupils and their parents. Miss Hargrove, one of the children cried, rushing forward. "We missed you at school." Tears sprang to Willow's eyes as the child hugged her awkwardly around her belly. "I've missed you too, Abigail." The girl's mother approached, smiling warmly. "We were all so sorry about what happened, Miss Hargrove. Not everyone agreed with how you were treated." "Thank you," Willow managed, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. Inside the small church, Reverend Collins greeted them with genuine warmth. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Hargrove, I'm pleased to officiate your union today." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Standing before the altar, Flynn's hands steady in hers, Willow felt the last of her doubts melt away. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. "I, Flynn Michael Blackwood, take thee, Willow Grace Hargrove, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Flynn vowed, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to cherish and protect you and this child, to be a true husband and father in all ways until death parts us." When it was Willow's turn, her voice trembled with emotion. "I, Willow Grace Hargrove, take thee, Flynn Michael Blackwood, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love and honor you, to build a home and family with you, to be a true wife in all ways until death parts us." "By the power vested in me," Reverend Collins proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Flynn's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise sealed before witnesses. As they turned to face their small congregation, Willow caught sight of a figure at the back of the church, Walter Preston, his face pale with shock. Flynn followed her gaze, his arm tightening protectively around her waist. "Ignore him," he murmured. "This day is ours." But as they walked down the aisle, Walter stepped forward, blocking their path. "Willow," he said, his voice strangled, "I heard you were getting married, but I didn't believe it." Willow lifted her chin. "Believe it, Walter. I am Mrs. Flynn Blackwood now." Walter's gaze dropped to her rounded belly, then back to her face. I may have been hasty in my judgment. You were cruel and cowardly," Flynn corrected, his tone dangerous. "You left this woman to die in a snowstorm." Walter paled further. "I never meant." "It doesn't matter what you meant," Willow interrupted. "What matters is what you did, and what Flynn did when he found me. Now please step aside. My husband and I have a celebration to attend." Something like regret flickered across Walter's face as he moved aside. "I hope you'll be happy," he said quietly. "I already am," Willow replied with perfect truth, tightening her grip on Flynn's arm as they continued down the aisle and out into the bright spring sunshine. The small reception at Mrs. Patterson's home was joyful and relaxed. Willow found herself surrounded by people who genuinely wished her well, who had never believed the worst of her. "I didn't know I still had friends here," she confessed to Flynn as they shared a piece of wedding cake. "People recognize goodness, Willow," Flynn replied, brushing a crumb from her lip with his thumb. "Just as they recognize its absence in men like Walter Preston." As the afternoon waned, Flynn helped his new wife back into the wagon for the journey home. Their guests waved them off with cheers and well wishes. "Mrs. Blackwood," Flynn said with satisfaction as they left Silver Creek behind. "For real this time," Willow leaned against his shoulder. "It feels right, doesn't it? Like this was always meant to be." "From the moment I found you in that snowstorm," Flynn agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I didn't know it then." Back at the cabin, their home, Flynn carried Willow over the threshold despite her protests about her weight. "My wife deserves a proper welcome," he insisted, setting her gently on her feet in the main room, which Mrs. Patterson had decorated with early spring wildflowers in their absence. "Your wife," Willow repeated wonderingly. "I never thought I'd be so happy to bear that title again." Flynn's expression grew serious as he took her hands in his. "I want you to know something, Willow. I meant every word of my vows today. This child," he placed a gentle hand on her belly, "is ours now. I'll love it as my own because it's a part of you." Tears spilled down Willow's cheeks. "How did I get so fortunate, to lose everything only to gain something far more precious?" "We're the fortunate ones," Flynn corrected, drawing her into his arms. "You and me and this little one. A family made by choice, not chance." Their life together settled into a new rhythm as April brought warmer days and the promise of new beginnings. Flynn worked tirelessly to prepare the cabin for the baby's arrival, building a cradle from pine wood and adding a small room off the main cabin. "So the little one will have a place of its own eventually," he explained as he showed Willow the addition. "For now, the cradle will stay in our room, our room." The words still gave Willow a thrill. Though they had been sharing the bedroom since their marriage, Flynn had been unfailingly gentle and considerate of her condition, his passion tempered by concern for her comfort. "You're a good man, Flynn Blackwood," Willow told him, watching as he smoothed the wood of the cradle with sandpaper. "This child is lucky to have you for a father." Flynn looked up, his eyes warm. "I hope I'll do right by it. I never had much example. My own father died when I was young." "You'll be wonderful," Willow assured him, coming to stand beside him. "You already are." May arrived with a profusion of wildflowers and increasingly uncomfortable nights for Willow as her time drew near. Flynn hovered anxiously, ready to ride for Mrs. Patterson at the first sign of labor. "You're worse than a mother hen," Willow teased as he adjusted her pillows for the third time one evening. "Can't help it," Flynn admitted sheepishly. "Never been so invested in anything as I am in you and this baby." The words warmed Willow's heart, easing the discomfort of her unwieldy body. "We're invested in you too," she replied, guiding his hand to feel the baby's kicks. "See, already saying hello to Papa." Flynn's face transformed with wonder at the movement beneath his palm. "Hello there, little one," he whispered. "We're waiting for you." They didn't have to wait much longer. 3 nights later, Willow woke to a sharp pain and a wet rush between her thighs. "Flynn," she gasped, shaking his shoulder. "It's time." Flynn was instantly alert, pulling on his boots and shirt. "I'll get Mrs. Patterson. Will you be all right alone for an hour?" Willow nodded through gritted teeth as another contraction seized her. "Just hurry." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination. Mrs. Patterson arrived in record time, efficiently taking charge of the situation while Flynn boiled water and gathered clean linens. "You're doing beautifully, Willow," Mrs. Patterson encouraged as the labor progressed. "Not long now." Flynn stayed by Willow's side, wiping her brow, letting her crush his hand during contractions, murmuring words of love and encouragement. "I can't," Willow gasped after particularly brutal pain. "Flynn, I can't do this." "You can," he insisted, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "You're the strongest woman I know, Willow Blackwood, just a little more." As dawn broke, Willow gave one final, mighty push and a thin wail filled the cabin. "A girl, Mrs. Patterson announced triumphantly, cleaning the tiny, red-faced infant. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Flynn's face was wet with tears as Mrs. Patterson placed the swaddled newborn in Willow's arms. "Look what you did," he whispered, awestruck. "Look at her, Willow, she's perfect." And she was tiny fingers, button nose, a wisp of dark hair that already promised to curl like Flynn's. Willow felt her heart expand impossibly as she gazed at her daughter. "Hello, Grace," she murmured, the name they had chosen if the baby was a girl after Willow's middle name. "Grace Elizabeth Blackwood," Flynn added, touching the baby's cheek with a reverent finger. "Welcome to the world, little one." Mrs. Patterson quietly busied herself cleaning up, giving the new family a moment of privacy. Flynn perched carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Willow, the other supporting the baby. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For my daughter, for being my wife, for everything." Willow leaned into his strength, exhausted but euphoric. "She's yours in every way that matters, Flynn." "I know," he replied simply. "I felt it the moment I saw her." In the weeks that followed, Flynn proved himself an adoring and capable father. He changed diapers, walked the floor with Grace when she was fussy, and insisted Willow rest whenever possible. "You created a miracle," he would say when she protested. "Least I can do is help care for it." By Grace's first month, life had settled into a new normal. Willow would sit in the rocking chair Flynn had built, nursing the baby while he worked outside, occasionally catching glimpses of him through the window. In those quiet moments, contentment washed over her, a feeling she had once thought lost forever. One evening, as summer painted the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple, Flynn and Willow sat on the porch, Grace sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "I've been thinking," Flynn said, his voice thoughtful, "about expanding the homestead." Willow glanced at him curiously. "In what way?" "Thought we might add a few more acres, build a bigger house eventually." He looked at her, a question in his eyes. "For more children, maybe, if you wanted that someday." Warmth bloomed in Willow's chest. "I'd like that very much, brothers and sisters for Grace." Flynn's smile was radiant as he leaned over to kiss her softly. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed. "A wife, a child, a family of my own." "Neither did I," Willow admitted. "Not after everything that happened, but now I can't imagine any other life." Flynn touched Grace's dark curls gently. "Remember what you said that day in the church, about already being happy?" Willow nodded. "I didn't know then that it could get even better," Flynn said, his voice husky with emotion. "But it has, Willow. Every day with you and Grace is better than the last." As twilight deepened around them, Willow leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, their daughter cradled between them. From devastation had come deliverance, a new life born of a chance encounter in a snowstorm, where a cowboy had covered a pregnant bride with his coat and his name, never suspecting he was also covering her heart with a love that would last a lifetime. 5 years later, Willow stood in the doorway of the new house Flynn had built, watching as he taught 5-year-old Grace to ride her pony in the fenced yard. The little girl's laughter rang out as Flynn led the gentle animal in a circle, his patient instructions occasionally interrupted by Grace's excited questions. "Not too fast, Papa," Grace called, her small hands gripping the reins just as Flynn had shown her. "I've got you, sweetheart," Flynn assured her, his hand steady on the lead rope. "You're doing great." Willow's hand rested on her rounded belly where their second child, a boy, according to Mrs. Patterson, would arrive before winter. Beside her, their adopted son William played with wooden blocks on the porch. The 3-year-old had come to them last year when his parents, friends of the Pattersons, had died of fever, leaving the boy orphaned. Flynn and Willow hadn't hesitated to take him in, officially adopting him on his 3rd birthday. "Mama, look," William called, pointing to his tower of blocks. "I made a house." "It's wonderful, darling," Willow praised, lowering herself carefully to the porch swing. "Is it as big as our house?" William considered this seriously. "Bigger," he decided, "for more brothers and sisters." Willow laughed, ruffling his blonde hair. "Let's get through this baby first, shall we?" Flynn looked up at the sound of her laughter, his face breaking into a smile that still made Willow's heart skip a beat. He said something to Grace, then lifted her from the pony and set her on her feet. "Go show Mama what a good rider you are," he suggested, and Grace ran to Willow, her dark curls bouncing. "Did you see me, Mama?" she asked breathlessly. "Papa says I'm a natural." "I saw," Willow confirmed, hugging her daughter. "You're becoming quite the horsewoman." Flynn approached, leading the pony back to its small corral. William abandoned his blocks to follow, fascinated as always by the animals. "Careful, son," Flynn cautioned, lifting the boy to see over the fence. "Remember, we always move slowly around the horses." "I remember, Papa," William said solemnly. "Can I give him an apple?" "One small piece," Flynn agreed, cutting a slice with his pocket knife and handing it to the boy. Watching them, Willow felt the familiar swell of gratitude that had become a constant companion over the years. Their family had grown in ways she could never have imagined that desperate day in the snowstorm. Flynn had kept his promise, becoming a true father to Grace, who adored him completely. The girl had his mannerisms, his determined chin, his love of the land, so much so that strangers often remarked on the resemblance, never suspecting she wasn't his by blood. When Flynn had suggested adopting William, Willow had fallen in love with her husband all over again. "Our family has room for more love," he'd said simply. And he'd been right. Flynn secured the corral and returned to the porch, William riding on his shoulders. He set the boy down next to his blocks and joined Willow on the swing, his arms sliding naturally around her shoulders. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his free hand resting on her belly. "Tired," Willow admitted. "But happy." Flynn dropped a kiss on her temple. "You should rest. Doctor said not to overdo things." "I'm fine," Willow assured him. just watching my family enjoy the afternoon." Grace climbed onto the swing with them, nestling against Willow's other side. "Tell us the story, Mama," she requested, "about how you and Papa met." It was her favorite bedtime tale, though they had softened certain details for the children's ears. Again, Willow teased. "You know it by heart already. Please," Grace wheedled. "William hasn't heard it in a long time," Flynn chuckled. 3 days is hardly a long time, Princess," but William had already abandoned his blocks and come to sit at their feet, looking up expectantly. "The snow story, Mama." Willow exchanged an amused glance with Flynn. "Well, it was the coldest winter anyone could remember," she began, settling into the familiar tale. "I was lost in a terrible snowstorm with nowhere to go and no one to help me. And then Papa came," Grace interjected enthusiastically. "And then Papa came," Willow agreed, squeezing Flynn's hand. "On his big black horse like a hero from a storybook, he wrapped me in his coat to keep me warm. And gave you his name," William added, clearly proud to remember this detail. "That's right," Flynn confirmed, his eyes meeting Willow's over the children's heads. "I gave her my coat and my name because sometimes that's all a person needs, warmth and belonging. And then you fell in love and got married and had me," Grace concluded triumphantly. Willow laughed. "Not quite that quickly, but yes, eventually we did all those things." "And then you got me too," William said contentedly. "And soon your baby brother will join us," Flynn added, patting Willow's belly. As the children chattered about the imminent arrival, Willow leaned her head against Flynn's shoulder, overwhelmed for a moment by the perfection of this life they had built together. "Happy," Flynn murmured against her hair. "Completely," Willow replied. "Are you?" Flynn's arm tightened around her, more than I ever thought possible. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Willow and Flynn stood on the porch watching the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky. "Do you ever think about that day?" Willow asked softly. "How differently things might have turned out if you hadn't ridden by when you did." Flynn pulled her close, his hand splayed protectively over her belly. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of losing you before I even knew you, it doesn't bear considering." "I used to think Walter's betrayal was the worst thing that could have happened to me," Willow said, watching the moon rise over the distant mountains. "Now I know it was the best." Flynn turned her gently to face him. "How so?" "It led me to you," Willow explained simply. "To this life, these children, this love. I wouldn't change a moment of it, even the painful parts, because they all led here." Flynn's eyes gleamed in the moonlight as he bent to kiss her, his lips tender against hers. "I love you, Willow Blackwood," he whispered. "From that first day in the snow to forever." "And I love you," Willow replied, her arms circling his neck. "My cowboy who gave me his coat and his name and then his heart." As they stood embraced in the moonlight, the baby kicked between them, a reminder of the continuing miracle of their unexpected life together. From the ashes of abandonment had risen a love stronger than either of them could have imagined, a love born in a snowstorm and tempered through trials and joys, a love that had given a lost, pregnant bride not just shelter from the storm, but a home for her heart. Flynn and Willow Blackwood's story became something of a legend in that corner of Montana. People spoke of the cowboy who'd found his bride in a blizzard, of the woman who'd risen from heartbreak to build a life filled with love. Their homestead grew as their family did, eventually encompassing 5 children: Grace, William, Frederick, Lily, and Joseph, and hundreds of acres of thriving ranch land. As the children grew, so did the Blackwood reputation for integrity and generosity. Flynn taught his sons and daughters alike to ride, rope, and respect the land, while Willow ensured they all received an education, eventually turning part of their expanded home into a small schoolhouse for neighboring children as well. And on cold winter nights, when snow blanketed the Montana landscape, the Blackwood family would gather around the fireplace in the home Flynn had built with his own hands, and Willow would tell the story of a desperate bride, a snowstorm, and the cowboy whose coat and name had saved not just her life, but her heart, a story of how the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, if only one is brave enough to keep moving forward through the storm.